This is Talkback 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309.
This is Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. KGVO, Missoula's news and weather station.
Hey, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Talkback for Thursday, October 10th, 2024. Talkback this morning is brought to you by 123 Seamless Gutters, your family-owned and operated business offering gutter installations, cleanings, and gutter guards. Good time to get that done. Call 406-240-2669, protecting the foundation of your future. By Y West Storage out at the Y on Two Smokes Way. If you need a storage unit, the number 406-510-0590, because they're making room for you at Y West. Phillips Janitorial does both residential and commercial cleaning, your home and your business. No job too big or small for Phillips. 406-260-6617. And by Harrington Surgical Supply, where their mission remains the same, to restore confidence and comfort into your daily life.
The views and opinions expressed on Talkback are not those of the staff, management, or advertisers.
All right, welcome everybody. Good to have you along. I'm Peter Christian. That is Mr. Nick Christensen over there. Hey, Mr. Nick, what's up?
Good morning. Good morning.
And we are thrilled and privileged to have with us one of our favorite guests, one of the original guests on Talkback for over these many years. Rob Natelson is joining us. Rob, good morning, sir.
It is wonderful to be here with Nick Christensen and Peter Christian. We bring you this morning two Christians and one Jew.
Rim shot. Now, there you go. All right. So it's good to have you here, and of course with the Independence Institute, good to have you back in Montana, home country for you. I know that you do a lot of traveling, and while you're in Montana, I know you do a lot of adventure traveling. I mean, you do a lot of hiking and mountain climbing and things like that.
Well,
you know what I mean.
Don't give people the wrong impression. Okay. we're talking about 5 and 6 mile day hikes.
Okay,
here,
well,
right?
Whatever, yeah.
But yeah, I do love to explore the mountain ranges of Montana, not just here in western Montana, but also what are called the island mountain ranges, the mountain ranges that are detached from the Rockies, ranges like the Judiths, for example, or the Crazies. They have some wonderful scenery and some wonderful hiking trails there.
All right, good deal. Well, it's good to have you hiking in here. And
you bet.
You should see this guy. He ran up 3 flights of stairs just to get here. And he wasn't even out of breath.
That's because I'm a child.
All right. We already have folks waiting on the line. By the way, as you noticed yesterday, we are having some trouble with the phones, but we have decided that trouble be darned. We are simply going to continue.
Plug ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob is right here in person in the studio.
Hey, Peter, can I do my promo?
Go for it.
Yeah, well, okay. Just came out yesterday.
Oh, that's right. A brand new book.
Right, brand new book. You can find it on Amazon. If you don't read Latin, you can't read it. In 1957, a children's book was published called David and the Phoenix. It was a weekly reader selection. For those of you who may remember the Weekly Reader Book Club. And it has remained a bestseller throughout the years. It's about a boy who comes from the flat country to a mountainous area, maybe Montana, I don't know.
Why not?
Anyway, he climbs a mountain, and while he's there, he sees a fabulous bird. And this bird turns out to be the one and the only phoenix, the same guy that sort of burns himself up every 500 years. He makes an appearance in Harry Potter also. Anyway, the phoenix is a talking bird, and the two of them fly off on adventures. Well, this is a wonderful story, not just for children, but also for adults, because the author, Edward Ormondroyd, has written it at several different levels. So children can be amused, but the parent reading it to the child sees all the in-jokes. You know. So,
Mom, why are you chuckling? Yeah.
So right. Well, some of the in-jokes are a little bit, never mind.
Yeah.
All right. At any rate, over a year ago, or actually more than a year ago, I said it would be wonderful to translate this book into Latin for the use in classical schools. You know, there's a very big classical school movement in this country, including in Montana.
Right, in Missoula.
And kids who attend classical schools invariably study Latin. But let's just face it, Cicero is not children's fare, right?
Right.
So this is a book for children, young adults, that is more accessible and is highly entertaining. So it just went up on Amazon Just went up on Amazon yesterday. And again, it's entitled David and the Phoenix. So just, if you're interested in seeing it, just, go to Amazon and say David and the Phoenix, Natelson. I'm not the author, obviously I'm the translator.
Right.
By the way, the author, Edward Ormondroyd, is now 98 years old, living in California.
And you actually asked his permission to do this.
The book is in the public domain,
right.
but I nevertheless went to him for permission.
Right.
And he gave it enthusiastically.
That's great.
So we've already sent him a proof copy, kind of an advanced copy. He'll get a real one once we can get it in the mail.
Hopefully personally autographed by Rob Natelson.
Well, that's actually a good idea. Yeah.
Anyway, we're up against our first break. We already have folks online waiting to visit with you. And
Let's go.
What I was saying before you jumped in there was we've had trouble with the phones, but yesterday we were with Walt Caro and it seemed to be okay. It's not perfect, but we still value the additions that our callers make. It really is a call-in talk show.
It certainly is.
And we're
One
going
of the
to
finest.
go ahead, Nick, please.
I was going to say, we're still able to use the phones, but we're still encouraging everyone to please, if you can, use the app to ask your questions, because the phones still are not 100%. And if you do call, we ask that you try to keep your question a little concise, because I just took the 2 calls and it's going to be a little hard to hear. So again, if you can use the app and use the message us button, please do so. If you need to call, that's okay. We'll try to make it work.
All right. So we are going to come right back after this quick timeout, and we have Buck and Skip. The phone lines are already filled. We haven't even asked you a question yet. Anyway, we're going to come right back with Talk Back with Rob Natelson in just a moment.
Dennis Bragg with the updated forecast. Some sun today, but a 20% chance of rain afternoon. Widespread haze, especially later as clouds increase with highs in the mid-60s. More fire smoke and haze overnight, but then general clearing with lows around 40. For Friday, a repeat of what we've seen most of the week with mostly sunny but hazy skies, warming to 70. Periods of clouds Friday night. Then we clear off Saturday and Sunday with plenty of sun, probably filtered through more smoke from Idaho. Highs in the low 70s and lows around 40.
Okay, here we are. We are back on Talk Back here in the studio. I'm Peter Christian. Nick Christensen over there taking your phone calls and once again encouraging you to use the KGVO app until we get the phones completely fixed. The app, you can just go online to the App Store, download it, and use the Message Us button. We'll be more than happy to pass that along to Rob Natelson. But we do have some folks waiting on the phone. Buck was first to call. And so, Buck, you are on Talkback, sir. What's on your mind?
Well, it's nice to know our modern digital world is so superior to the old analog way of doing things. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I hear laughter, so I must be projecting through. Rob, we've always, maybe against the founding fathers' desires or recommendation, been a two-party country, really. I think in the early days, wasn't it the Whigs and the Tories, and the Republican Party came out of the Civil War, and we're definitely a two-party political entity now. And you can have spoilers like H. Ross Perot. I think he got as much as 21%. But he could spoil the outcome, but he wouldn't change the fact that one of the two parties would be at the high level of president and the higher offices. So kind of relating to C-126, I've always thought, maybe misguided, that primaries were party business, and also some New England states, I think they have caucuses in lieu of parties. So would you give the history of the primary as and its purpose? Am I wrong to say that it's really has always been party business?
Well, thanks for calling, Buck. When you go into a history book, you'll see the comment that the founders didn't believe in parties or they didn't expect parties to arise. That's not really true. That may have been true of James Madison, who was a real idealist, but there were parties all through the Confederation era. And you're right. I mean, the Patriots versus the Tories is a great example of that. Even during the Washington administration became identified with the Federalists, and a loyal opposition arose, out of which came the Democratic Republican Party, which eventually became the Democratic Party. So the idea of the two-party system goes back very, very deep. The two-party system, that is to say, having two parties on the ballot, That's only the final stage. As you point out, there are earlier stages. There are primaries and caucuses by which people within the party choose their nominees. So it's a successive period of choices. As I understand it, what 126 would do is kind of jumble it up in a way so that there were more choices during the general election, but the election would not simply be focused on two candidates. You'd have up to 4 candidates on the ballot, and what that means in practice is that somebody could be elected governor, for example, with 26% of the vote. This is not idle speculation. There are 7 countries out there that have what amount to national popular vote for president without runoffs, and they regularly elect their president with 30%, 35% of the vote, and meaning that 3/4 or 2/3 of the people oppose the guy who eventually gets elected. So I think the two-party system has served us well, and I would discourage experiments like 126. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you how to vote. I don't vote in Montana. I vote in Colorado. But we've got a similar measure in Colorado, and I plan to vote enthusiastically against that one.
Buck, thanks for the call. Let's get
you bet.
You bet. Thanks for the call. Let's get Skip on the line next. Skip, good morning. You are on with Rob Natelson. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Peter. I hope this is clear. And Rob, it's wonderful to hear you. You sound like you changed your diet or something. You have amazing energy, and you just sound like you're getting younger.
Well, thank you, Skip. It has something to do with the fact that I'm here in Missoula in the studio with an elevation of only 3,200 feet, where I live at 6,000, and so we've got a whole lot of
got more oxygen.
More oxygen. and by the way, Skip, I just want to tell you that while your voice is a little crumply over the line, the clarity of your intelligence more than compensates for that.
Wow!
So go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm levitating. So there's so many things I wanted to ask you this morning, but I thought I'd get down to one, and it has to do with our Supreme Court and the initiatives that are on our ballot, the CI 126 and 27. I think they're written in such a confusing way. And by the way, our state put out a wonderful pamphlet for everybody to try and read so they understand at least some of the basics, both sides of the coin. And so I'm wondering, as we vote on these things, is there some way that we can explain to the people how this what I think was derived from ranked choice voting, whether it's good or not to have these open ballots in the primary election, because they can cause some problems on one hand, but on the other hand, they tend to, like in Valley County, where I would suggest we have a lot of extremists running for office. It can help balance the product that we get in our general election.
All right.
So I was wondering your opinion on those things. My guess is, and I'm hoping you've reviewed 126 and 127. Thank you, sir, very much.
Thanks for the call. And Rob is going to answer that question when we return after this quick timeout. Harry and Tyler are both waiting to visit with Rob Natelson from the Independence Institute right here in the studio for the first time in a long time. And it's good to have him. We'll be right back after this. We are back on Talk Back, and Rob Natelson joining us here in the studio this morning for this hour, and we really appreciate it. Skip had some interesting questions for you, Rob. Please go ahead.
I can't deal with everything Skip raised, but I do want to, and I'm sorry if this sounds a little bit unusual, but I've never been afraid to state the unusual. I'm going to say a good thing about divisiveness, right? I'm going to say a good thing about having choices. Elections are supposed to be about choices. They're supposed to be about voters having before them 2 or more candidates that represent different approaches to governing, and then the voters choose one of those courses. those folks who say we have too many candidates on the extreme, that all the candidates should be in the middle, or that most of them should be in the middle, are really saying that voters should not have the choice, that there's going to be the same kind of governance there always has been. Let me use a foreign example. Margaret Thatcher never would have been elected if the situation had been stacked in a way that only establishment, moderate type people could run for office or get party nominations. What had been happening in Britain for years is that whether Labour was elected or the Conservatives were elected, it was the same kind of centrist drifting. And England became a very, very grim place. I know I visited England just before Thatcher was elected. Thatcher came with a clear message, one that was very different from the other messages that had been conveyed to the British electorate. She was elected, and frankly, she saved the country. You can say the same thing, although to a somewhat lesser degree, regarding Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was too extreme, out of the mainstream. We needed, just have moderates on the slate. But it was Reagan who made possible the new approach that ended the Cold War and restored American prosperity. And so don't be afraid of choice. And there's nothing wrong with having a strong liberal and a strong conservative facing off against each other. It gives people a real choice. It helps to crystallize the issues so people can understand them better. Don't buy the snake oil that everybody running for office should be a moderate, or that we should adopt some system so that we only elect moderates.
All right, let's move on and get Harry on the phone. Harry, thank you for holding. You're on with Rob Natelson. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, Rob.
Hi, Harry.
Yeah, I caught your presentation before the Montana legislature on judicial overview, and you made several. Well, there's like 5 things you said that a decision should have, and a couple of them the first one you said that the clarity was one, but then you go ahead, you admit that clarity doesn't have a real definition, and you said a subjective view that this, but then so that really isn't a salient point, because if you can't describe what it is, then it really doesn't matter. But then also later on you say, the Montana Supreme Court has a tendency to side with the liberals over conservatives, but those are subjective too. I mean, the idea that something is conservative or liberal, those are really vague meaning, pretty much meaningless, because one person is conservative, another person is liberal, and but the also thing that the Montana people who claim that the Supreme Court is liberal also have a tendency to say that our Constitution is liberal. So wouldn't that say that? Well, if they're following the Constitution, wouldn't their decisions be more liberal? And a couple other points. You claim that the Montana Supreme Court.
Harry, I can't deal with all of us. Okay, can we deal with what we got so far?
Let's winnow it down to one.
More points. I just want a couple more points. Just that you claim that they're an oligarchy, but we vote them in, so actually they're not. Supreme Court, United Supreme Court, is more like an oligarchy than the state. And just the overall view is that I think the reason the judicial overview thing is the Montana legislature is a supermajority, and they got their nose out of joint because they can't get everything they want done, and so they're having a hissy fit, and this is how they show it. So,
all right, Harry, thanks for the call. Okay, boom, boom, boom.
All right, number one. First, Harry, I congratulate you on your ability, your staying power of being able to sit through my testimony. The clarity was one of 5 indicia or indices I gave that are characteristic of the rule of law. In other words, a part of following the rule of law is that a court's decisions have to be reasonably clear. Now, I said that there's no absolute objective standard of clarity, and I'll stand by that. But there certainly are things that are more clear than other things. And when you have a court that has an opinion with a very important opinion in a very important case, with 2 sentences that follow each other, that directly contradict each other, then you know by any standard that opinion is not clear. And by any standard, there are many other opinions that come out of the Supreme Court that are not clear. I did say that I thought that clarity on the court over the past decade had improved somewhat, but there were still a large number of problems. As to the court being an oligarchy, the founders thought of the judicial branch as kind of an oligarchical branch of government or an aristocratic branch of government. But what prevents our state or our country from being an oligarchy or an aristocracy is that we limit the court very narrow to certain narrow decisions. That is to say, decisions interpreting the law. The court is not supposed to venture into legislation or into executive policy, but this court does. So if you've got an oligarchical branch, which is no longer limited to deciding legal cases, but is actually making policy, yeah, you got yourself an oligarchy. I frankly don't remember what the other points Harry made.
Well, that's okay because we're up against a break.
Okay,
we're gonna the break will save us all. We're gonna come right back. We still have Tyler and Nancy and Dave all waiting to visit with you. Now, please keep in mind, Rob's only going to be with us for an hour, so we again appreciate his time coming all the way here and hanging out with us in the studio. We're going to come right back with more right after this.
Dennis Bragg with the updated forecast. Some sun today, but a 20% chance of rain afternoon. Widespread haze, especially later as clouds increase with highs in the mid-60s. More fire smoke and haze overnight, but then general clearing with lows around 40. For Friday, a repeat of what we've seen most of the week with mostly sunny but hazy skies, warming to 70. Periods of clouds Friday night. Then we clear off Saturday and Sunday with plenty of sun, probably filtered through more smoke from Idaho. Highs in the low 70s and lows around 40.
Hey, we are back on Talkback, and again, our guest in studio, Rob Natelson from the Independence Institute, formerly a law professor at the University of Montana. We are thrilled to have him back here in the studio. Questions for Rob? We would appreciate it if you use the KGVO app to send your question in. We'd be more than happy to do that, but we are taking phone calls as well. Tyler, good morning. You are on Talkback with Rob. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Hi, Tyler.
Rob, hi, thanks for taking the call. Kamala Harris, as vice president, has one job. As per the Constitution, she's the president of the Senate. That was fine when Biden was the nominee for this current election. But when he dropped out and she stepped in, is there a conflict of interest of her counting her own electoral votes in the Senate for her own race?
Actually, if there is, it's very minimal. Just to explain.
She would just have to say, I win.
No, she can't do that. Let's go back to what the Constitution says. The Constitution says that the electors meet in their respective states and they cast a vote and they take their sealed ballots and they send it into Congress. And then there's a joint session of Congress, not of the Senate. There's a joint session of Congress which counts the votes. And the vice president presides over that. During the 2020 election contest, I think a lot of misunderstanding arose. And I will say that this is partly the fault of Donald Trump. Trump argued that the vice president himself could control those proceedings because he was the chairman of the proceedings. The vice president doesn't have that power. His job is to moderate from the chair, and if he makes any decisions that the majority of Congress doesn't like, he can be overturned. So if Kamala Harris simply said, notwithstanding the actual tally of electoral votes, I'm elected, that would be subject to an objection from the floor, and that would be overturned. So that the only role of the vice president here is as the chairman or the presiding officer of the joint session of Congress. But it's actually the joint session of Congress that counts the ballots, not the vice president.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for the call, sir. You bet. Let's get Nancy on the line. Nancy, good morning. You're on with Rob Natelson. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Cory and Rob. Good morning. It's good to speak with you again. This is going to be kind of a far-out conversation. I want to talk about Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who represents the state of Georgia that was devastated by Hurricane Helene. She said they can control the weather. And this took me back to the 1990s when we had that fabricated Phoenix storm by our government made up. And there was a writer at the time named Cohen, Cohen, that said that, yes, our government has found ways to control the weather. And immediately a gag order was put on him and also all the weather stations in our country by our government. And when you look at this, there seems to be a pattern. North Carolina, Asheville was blue. And, of course, all the surrounding area votes red. And I want to ask you, Rob, these people are not going to be able to get to the polls. Also in Florida, the polls have been destroyed. Mailboxes have been destroyed. What do you believe in the theory that government can control weather? And I want to know, too, how is this going to impact the election if people can't vote less than 4 weeks? And thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks for the call. That is a concern with the areas that have been affected by the hurricanes.
Yeah, a stake in a justice law to allow for that, and that's already happening to a certain extent. Now, with the disclaimer that I'm not a meteorologist, I think we tend to overestimate our own powers. You know, the climate change crowd is part of the same problem. They sort of assume that mankind can radically change the climate on planet Earth by the cars we drive. For anybody who thinks that mankind is that powerful, I recommend taking a jet plane, going up to 37,000 feet, and looking down and seeing just how insignificant we are. So I would be highly dubious about the claim that government can control the weather, just as I am rather dubious that we are radically causing climate change.
All right, let's get another call in. This is Dave. Dave has been waiting the longest. Dave, good morning. You're on Talkback with Rob. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm concerned about and I think the founding fathers would be too, about the power of the president has been growing for many, many years, and the parties. I mean, the parties are more powerful than ever. If they don't like one of their members, they just kick them out, and it's become almost a dictatorship. You have to follow the line of the party, or you're no longer considered part of the party, and I think it's a danger to our country.
To respond very quickly to that, actually the parties are not more powerful than ever. They're less powerful. And the reason for that has to do with campaign finance laws. Campaign finance laws have been limiting how much a party can give to a candidate, while political action committees, independent political action committees, can essentially spend any amount of money within certain minor restrictions in effectively supporting or not supporting a candidate. I'm actually concerned in the opposite direction. I think the parties need to be somewhat more powerful, that the limits need to be taken off them from in campaign finance.
There's plenty of money going into campaign finances. I don't see a problem with the money. You hear all the commercials, and they have.
No, I'm not saying there's too much money. Well, maybe there is too much money, but the point is, I don't see the limit. I don't see the solution as limiting the money. I see the solution as taking the limits off the parties, because the parties are limited to the extent that they can control. They can limited to the extent that they can fund their own candidates.
But freedom of speech within the parties. I mean, if an individual doesn't toe the line, I mean, he's in trouble. The parties cut him off and kick him out.
Well, I know. I'm personally aware of that when I ran against Mark Roscoe. I mean, it was enormous pressure within the Republican Party against me. On the other hand, you know, it's their organization. It's their right. If they think that Mark Roscoe is a great candidate and Rob Natelson's the worst thing since slugs, you know, that's their First Amendment right to believe that, however erroneous it may be. I mean, that's the nature of a party organization. If you don't like it, start a new party, or better still, take over the parties that exist.
And Dave, we give you one more point. We're up against a break.
Did they kick you out of the party, or
Almost. No, not exactly. They didn't have the power to kick me out of the party, but they had the power to freeze me out of various party events. And that's what they did.
All right. Dave, thanks for the call. We're going to come right back. We do have an app question, probably several app questions waiting for Rob Natelson, who's only going to be with us for another 19 minutes. So we are thrilled to have him. And so if you want to use the KGVO app, we would encourage you to do that. The phone lines are also open at 721-1290. We'll be back right after this.
Call 123.
Disaster? Because it's not a matter of if, but when. Don't find yourself saying, I'll trust water bottles and a flashlight to save the day. But I'd be proof wrong. The tornado approaching, I'll realize that I like a wheelchair accessible shelter. When the flood waters rise, I'll be up in the attic with cans of beans. It's a recipe for disaster. As prepared, we all have a better story to tell. Get started at ready.gov/older adults. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
We are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. And, of course, Nick Christensen over there producing Talkback. What's going on there, sir?
We have an app question from Katie. She said, many politically powerful people in government positions have started talking lately about the need to get rid of the First Amendment and instituting government control of speech and the press to criminalize so-called misinformation. As an example, John Kerry gave a speech about this very idea. Would you discuss this?
I don't think they're exactly saying we need to get rid of the First Amendment. I think what they want to do is violate the First Amendment without taking the blame for getting rid of it. It's very concerning. I remember many years ago when I was a very young man, we had a lot of gatherings in which liberals predominated. And one liberal told me that he wasn't concerned about the government controlling the economy, controlling health care, regulating business and aspect of our lives, because he said ultimately we vote for the people who are in control of the government. Well, that's a very naive view. It's naive because people who control everything else eventually want to control free speech and elections as well. That seems to be the nature of some people. So it doesn't surprise me at all that the same people who want to regulate our health care, want to regulate our guns, want to regulate our businesses, want to regulate our schools, also want to regulate our free speech. We have a problem in that respect. The problem is kind of the progressive virus. And if we want to keep our country, we've got to cure that virus.
All right, let's get another call in. This is Emmett. Emmett, you are up with Rob Natelson. Go ahead, please.
Oh, thanks for taking my call. Well, part of one of the caller's questions wasn't answered. She was concerned, as I was, and I was going to call about this, now I am, about the disasters in Florida and Georgia and North Carolina and how that will affect the elections. Now with this other big hurricane, Milton, how are they going to have elections in Florida? Will they be able to in these other states? Because I'm worried that since Florida often votes red and votes Republican, this may throw the election to Kamala, and in a few weeks, Kamala may be elected as our next president thanks to these storms. Will they be able to vote? Will there be any way for them, the people in those states that are affected to vote, because everything's out?
Emmett, it's a really good question. It's best directed to the Florida Secretary of State. Really. I mean, the Florida election officials, ask them what's going on.
Oh, but I don't know how to get a hold of them.
Well,
you go to the internet and you enter Florida Secretary of State or Florida Election Administration. Right. And I'm sure they've got information on exactly that. Same thing with North Carolina.
Yeah, any state that is subject to that kind of the kind of storm systems during an election season, of course. There is something that's already years ago, I'm sure, put into place to guarantee that votes will be properly counted.
Yeah, there's long been a provision, for example, in federal law for allowing elections to go on beyond Election Day in certain emergencies.
All right.
So that's best directed to election administrators, not to a constitutional guy.
Emma, thanks for the call. Denise is up next. Denise, good morning. You're on Talkback.
Good morning. Thank you for being on the show, Mr. Natelson. I have a question concerning First Amendment. I am a volunteer pen pal for prisoners, and it's hard to get complete letters to these people. They actually open the letters before delivering them to the prisoners and copy them and then throw away the originals. I see a lot of mishandling of the mail through this, and I'm wondering if there's anything that can be done. I know a lot of these correction, and I use that word loosely, facilities are now privatized. What can we do in order to ensure that the prisoners get the whole letter? A lot of the copies are miscopied and are delivered on time. They actually have rules that they have to deliver within a certain 24 to 48 hour period of receiving those letters. I could go on, but if you could address that for just a minute. Thanks so much. And we'll hang up and listen.
Denise, I don't have good answers for you. First off, the U.S. Supreme Court has held that the First Amendment rights of prisoners are extremely limited. It's one of the areas in which citizens cannot exercise full First Amendment rights when they're incarcerated by the government. If you think that, nevertheless, that the rules are being violated, I can't suggest anything other than suing them or threatening to sue them. I mean, go to a litigation agency like the ACLU. The ACLU always seems to be interested in representing prisoners. That would probably be my first stop.
All right. And with that, we're less than a minute away from a break, so we're going to take it right now. Elena and Jeff are both waiting to visit with you. Rob Natelson only here with us for about another 10 minutes or so. And so we would encourage your text through the KGVO app, or if you'd like to call, you can do that too. 721-1290. Back in just a minute. Welcome back to Talk Back, our final segment with Rob Natelson from the Independence Institute. He's the Constitutional Studies Center. He runs the Constitutional Studies Center there. And so we wanted to finish the question.
Yeah, there was a loose end left from my discussion with Harry.
Yes.
Harry mentioned that in my talk to the Montana legislature, I spoke about the judicial virtue of clarity. That it's important that cases be clear to the extent that the law permits that. Just to explain here, when I did my study of the Montana Supreme Court for the Frontier Institute, as in my previous study back in 2012 for the Montana Policy Institute, I graded the state Supreme Court based on five criteria that are criteria of the rule of law. In other words, if the courts follow these criteria, they follow the rule of law. If they violate the criteria, they violate the rule of law. They are clarity, stability, notice, fairness, and judicial restraint. And under the category of fairness, Harry asked the question of, how do you know if something is conservative or liberal? What I did is I went through every ballot issue for the past 40 years. There were some ballot issues that were not clearly conservative or clearly liberal, but there were other ballot issues that were clearly on one side or the other. And then I categorized the result by how the court treated each of the ballot issues. And what I found, and I don't think there's any way really to contradict this, is that the court upheld every single liberal ballot issue that was challenged over the last 40 years, and it struck down almost every conservative ballot issue that was challenged. It was a striking division.
You're talking about the Montana Supreme Court.
Right. Very, very hard to deny those facts. I went beyond that into other indications of unfairness, but that's the one that stands out most prominently.
Were you surprised, or because?
No, I wasn't surprised this time.
Okay.
Because I had seen the pattern developing in 2012 when I did the earlier study. So this was consistent with the prior pattern. The court is very political. It treats liberal litigants, left of center litigants, and liberal causes and left of center causes very differently from how it treats conservative litigants and causes. And again, there are dramatic examples of that which you can see by reading the Frontier Institute study, and you can find that on the Independence Institute website.
And I will tell you, we had a Supreme Court candidate here in our studio, and one of her clarion calls was, I'm going to do everything I can to keep politics out of the Montana Supreme Court. And we discussed this a little bit, and to me it sounds just, I mentioned to her that it sounds a little bit naive.
Right. I mean, the judges, when they go before you, and this is one of the problems with our current election system, because they run in a nonpartisan ballot, people don't have a good clue as to where they're really coming from. Because all the candidates say pretty much the same thing. I'll uphold the Constitution, I'll uphold the law, and so forth. But I didn't take those statements into account. I looked at what they actually did, and what they actually did was highly political. Harry made one other point, too, which I thought was interesting. The Montana Constitution is seen as a liberal constitution, and therefore wouldn't that necessarily produce fairly liberal results. And to a certain extent, that's true, but not to the extent that the Montana Supreme Court takes it. The Montana Supreme Court interprets parts of the Constitution in a very liberal way that really are not written in that way.
All right, let's try to get another call or so in because we're running out of time. Elena, good morning. You're on Talk Back with Rob.
Hi, Elena.
Hi, good morning. Clarity, perfect. That's like my question. Yesterday, Will Carroll was on having his tax discussion. Something was brought up about the 16th Amendment that the Supreme Court has declared that it was constitutional. However, the part that has never been answered by the Supreme Court, and I want you to clarify this, is they never define the term income in the 16th Amendment. Have they ever defined the term income? Because that's the whole bone of contention. What is income?
All right, we have exactly 2 minutes. Go.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can fully answer that because I haven't gone into I haven't spent a lot of time with 16th Amendment law. As I recall, the 16th Amendment says income from any sources. I think it's pretty clear that unrealized capital gains are not income, right? That taxing unrealized capital gains is a wealth tax, and that it is a direct tax, and as such would have to be apportioned among the states. Obviously, there are some difficult issues between something that is clearly wealth and something that is clearly income, and I just can't get into those weeds today because I haven't done the research.
Okay, but as far as the income tax as it refers to the people, the general population, I don't have income, and that's what the bone of contention is.
What do you mean you don't have income?
I don't have any income.
Okay.
I work, and I get paid for my work. I don't take that money and invest it in something like a business does. A business has income.
Well, no, Elena, it says income from whatever source, and that would include wages. I mean, even if you've got wages, I think the ordinary.
But a business doesn't get wages. When it was originally inputted, the taxing back when, it was basically just businesses, industries.
That was the choice.
I'm not going to get into that, but that's the whole bone of contention.
That was the choice of Congress. Yeah. The ordinary meaning of income at the time that amendment was adopted would certainly include wages and salaries, not just business income.
We are out of time with Rob. We have about a minute left. So how can we find out more about your work?
I think the best way to do that is to go to the Independence Institute website. That's independenceinstitute.org and click on the Constitution tab. And, of course, I have a book out there called The Original Constitution, What It Actually Said and Meant, which you can get either from BarnesandNoble.com or Amazon.com. And if you're into classical education, you might want to look at the book that just came out yesterday, which is a translation into the Latin language of the children's book classic, David and the Phoenix.
Rob, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And speaking of the Supreme Court, Cory Swanson, a candidate for the Montana Supreme Court, is going to be joining us in the 9 o'clock hours. We hope that you will stay with us for that and apply him with questions and comments as well.
Ask him what grade I gave him.
Yeah. All right, I'll do that. All right, we'll be back. Stay with us.
This is Talkback 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309.
This is Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. KGVO, Missoula's news and weather station.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's hour number 2 of Talkback for this Thursday, October 10th. Talkback this morning is brought to you by Harrington Surgical Supply, where you can feel confident in their discreet and their knowledgeable guidance on a multitude of products and medical supplies. Also brought to you by Phillips Janitorial, cleaning both your home and your business with your satisfaction guaranteed. No job too big or small for Phillips. 406-260-6617. Also brought to you by Y West Storage out at the Y on Two Smokes Way. Find out if they have a storage unit for you. I'll bet they do. Call 406-510-0590 because they are making room for you. And by 123 Seamless Gutters, family owned and operated, offering gutter installations, gutter guards, top-notch customer service. They take care of your gutters so you don't have to. 406-240-2669, protecting the foundation of your future.
The views and opinions expressed on Talkback are not those of the staff, management, or advertisers.
Okay, welcome back. Hour number 2. Again, a big thank you to Rob Natelson for being with us from the Independence Institute. But joining us on the phone right now, we are shifting gears and talking with Cory Swanson, candidate for the Montana Supreme Court. Cory, it's good to have you back, sir. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on this morning.
You bet. So, people, we already have a caller waiting to visit with you, but I wanted to give you a chance to set the table first. For those who don't know Cory Swanson, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for the office of one of the highest offices in our state, the Montana Supreme Court.
Yeah, we're facing a very interesting time right now. This is a very important election, 2024. We all know that, right, for a variety of reasons. But the Montana Supreme Court has 7 members, and there are currently 2 members who are retiring this year. So there's 2 open seats on the Supreme Court. And so that, I think, presents an opportunity for a significant change on the court. I am running for Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court, and there's another seat open, Associate Justice, and I understand you may have heard from Judge Dan Wilson or Judge Catherine Bittigary. Those 2 are running against each other for the Associate Justice position. I'm running for Chief Justice, and I'm doing that because for a variety of reasons, but I think one of the things that's been most prominently talked about this year is there seems to be a lot of political conflict in Helena right now among the different branches of government. And in my view, a lot of that is unnecessary. And in addition to the work of a justice in deciding cases, my goal is to, as the Chief Justice, focus on reducing that political tension and that reducing the pressure and the temperature, and get people back to focusing on doing their jobs and not fighting about it. So I have a long background in the law. I'm a county attorney in Broadwater County, in my 10th year doing that. So I'm a prosecutor. I worked for Department of Justice under Attorney General Tim Fox. I was in a private law firm as well, did a lot of civil law. And then kind of as a parallel career, I've been in the Army National Guard for a long time, 27 years, and happy to visit more about that. But I'm running because I think that we can make a positive change in the court, and I'm eager to do that, and I'm also glad that I think everyone is glad that we're near the end of a very long election cycle.
Is it realistic, and we have a couple of callers waiting, but a quick question from me, is it realistic to say, I will do my best to keep politics out of the Supreme Court?
Well, I think that's absolutely the goal. That should be the goal. And I've been saying that literally from day one, the day I announced, because when you have to remember, first of all, that the politically charged cases are a very small minority of all the cases that the Supreme Court decides on a yearly basis. The vast majority of the cases have nothing to do with politics. They're just ordinary cases, whether it's a criminal appeal or a civil lawsuit that matters to two parties, and nobody else even knows about it. It's never in the news. My goal is for the court to decide those cases, each case, based on the facts and the law of that case, period, in a manner that I generally collectively call judicial conservatism rather than judicial activism. And I think the court should decide the least controversial, least notoriety cases in the exact same manner as the most controversial, the most politically charged cases. And if you can have a consistent methodology of deciding cases correctly based solely on the facts and the law of the case, not based on the political considerations, then that's really where we can get to a point where we say we're deciding cases based on their merits, not based on politics.
All right. I think we have time to get our first caller in. There's a lot of folks wanting to visit with you. Jeff has been waiting throughout the break. So, Jeff, you're on with Cory Swanson. Go ahead, please.
Hey, Cory, it's a privilege to talk to one of the Sons of Liberty, and I appreciate your service as a fellow vet. Let me thank you for that. Your predecessor on Talkback, Rob Natelson, was talking about a friend of his, or a guy he knew when he was young, who said he didn't worry about politicians being liberal because you could vote them out. But I don't think the problem is politicians. I think as we look at it today, the problem we have is a engorged and enlarged bureaucracy, somewhat at the state level, but very much more so at the federal level. And I guess my question would be two questions. The first one is, what would be the role of the state Supreme Court in limiting the effects of bureaucracies, and also maybe even NGOs, non-governmental organizations that are funded by dark money, in terms of their impact on governing us indirectly versus the politicians governing us directly? And then second of all, Rob Natelson wanted us to ask you what grade you got, what grade he gave you when you were a student. So if you could answer both of those, please.
All right, we'll do that when we come back from the break. We're right on time for a break, and thanks for the call, Jeff. And I'm sure Cory will love to jump into that. We also have Skip, Nancy, and Mark also waiting to visit with Cory Swanson, candidate for Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court. And we'll be right back with more after this.
I'm Representative
Dennis Bragg with the updated forecast. Some sun today, but a 20% chance of rain afternoon. Widespread haze, especially later as clouds increase with highs in the mid-60s. More fire smoke and haze overnight, but then general clearing with lows around 40. For Friday, a repeat of what we've seen most of the week with mostly sunny but hazy skies, warming to 70. Periods of clouds Friday night. Then we clear off Saturday and Sunday with plenty of sun, probably filtered through more smoke from Idaho. Highs in the low 70s and lows around 40.
Okay, we are back on Talkback. We just want to take just a quick moment to say thank you to our listeners on the air because of the problems with our phones, but you're hanging in there, you're listening, you're responding, and we deeply appreciate you hanging in there with us, even though we're dealing with these technical difficulties. Thank you. But joining us on the phone right now, Cory Swanson, running for Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court. Let's continue with Skip.
We had questions from Jeff.
Oh, I'm sorry, with Jeff. I'm sorry. Yeah, we had to take our break. So go ahead. Jeff had some very interesting questions for you.
The role of the Supreme Court on limiting the power of bureaucracy or NGOs in governing the state rather than the legislature, and then he had a question about what Professor Natelson said. So I'll start with the key thing of when you look at the bureaucracy and you look at the interpretation of state statutes. It's important to realize that a lot of times when there's state statutes, there's a provision in the statute for administrative rules to be drafted. And that's where the bureaucracy tends to draft those rules. Well, when the court interprets those rules, we have to, number one, make sure that they're consistent with the statute. The legislature, it's been a long time, but it's been over 10 years, implemented a procedure where legislators can object to the rules if they think that the administrative rules are contrary to the statute. But if they go through all that, the court's job is to interpret the text of those rules and ensure that they are consistent with the statute. And if they're not, then obviously that the court has to rule accordingly. The other thing you need to know about the issue of non-governmental organizations is a lot of times they are very active litigants in the courts, particularly as plaintiffs. And so what I've seen from time to time, a non-governmental organization, an association of some kind, a membership organization will sue to challenge a particular policy or particular law. And I think what they're attempting to do in many cases, there's a lot of them that are legitimate, but there's sometimes you worry that they're trying to abuse the process of litigation to change policy. And we've seen this at the federal level. During the Obama administration, there was a national trend of organizations suing the federal government, and it was almost like a friendly lawsuit, and then they would enter into what's called a consent decree, and the court would issue an order, and that became the new law or policy. And it was policy making through litigation. And that kind of hijacks the representative government process. So one thing you should pay attention to, and if you look at Professor Natelson's report that he published earlier this year, he addresses this question of standing. Standing is the ability or the right of someone to actually go to court to seek redress of whatever their grievance is. And there's some elements of standing. Number one, you have to have a person or an entity that's actually injured by an action of the other party, the defendant. But then the third thing is you have to have the ability through court to get some kind of redress for that injury. And Montana has a very expansive standing doctrine. And there's times when you have to ask yourself, is it too expansive? Are we allowing groups that don't actually have an injury, have merely an objection to the policy process? They didn't get their way at the legislature, so now they're trying to get their way a second time through the court. That's something the court has to pay close attention to. The third part of that question was my grade in law school. So I took a couple different classes from Professor Natelson. I took a class called Legal History, which is one of the best classes I took. And in that class, he focuses on the intellectual sources of the United States Constitution. So we're going back and we're looking at the long march towards the U.S. Constitution and the liberties that we have, the separation of powers, the checks and balances, the attempt to prevent an emperor from having sole power over a government. And so that was a great class. He told me later that I got the high A in that class. What he didn't or maybe he forgot about is I took property also from him, which is a very difficult class. I took my first semester property in, I think my second year, and I think I got a good grade. I think he told me I got a good grade. But then I took a semester off and I worked and I came back. So I took property over a year later, the second half of it, and it was really hard to kind of like jump back in and remember everything. And so I really struggled with the class. And then it was the last test I took in law school. And the day before I took the final, I got notified that I was about to get deployed to Iraq with the 163rd Infantry, which I was really excited about. I wanted to go. And I have to admit, I think studying went out the window at that point. So I've gotten 2 C's in my entire life. One was a freshman in high school choir. I was never going to make it as a singer. And the second was my last test I took in law school, which was property 2 with Professor Natelson. So he flatters me with saying I was a good student. I was like, well, I passed, but it was a struggle there.
Well, let's put it this way. You were distracted, and it was a good distraction. So let's go ahead and get another call in. This is Skip. Skip, good morning. You're on with Cory Swanson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Peter. And Cory, thank you for coming on today. And I promise everybody that the way your voice sounds is not the real Cory as far as the sound, because when you answer questions, and I've been to 3 of Cory's meet and greets, and it's a wonderful interactive lecture hall each time. I just learned so much stuff. But he's the youngest. He's just such a young, vibrant man with all of his experience in so many ways. I thank you, sir, for stepping up to the plate and running for this office. And I encourage people to even watch you on your interviews and the forum, like the one that's on CBS of the forum that you were in Great Falls. It's amazing to see the difference and the clarity and the scope that you have compared to your opponent, Jeremiah. And I just wanted to ask you about Jeremiah's consistency in his he's always talking about precedent law, and that's what he would go to. I wonder how either appropriate that is or what he's really talking about when it comes to making decisions in such an important position as, say, Supreme Court Chief Justice. I've heard him say that a lot, and he also says we have a constitutional democracy.
Relatively underused since its massive reconstruction in 2018. In Butte for the Montana News Network, I'm Tom O'Neill.
Leaders of a new group fighting the idea of urban camping by the homeless in Missoula are upset. The city passed a new policy in the middle of summer with what they say was little notification. David Moore says the new ordinance caught people off guard.
Because they did this decision over the summer, a lot of people were out of town. They didn't get involved. And most people I talked to can't believe that they did this.
Moore says the group now has hundreds of signatures urging the city council to reconsider. And this morning marks day 2 of the politically charged hearing over 41 counts of misconduct filed against Montana State Attorney General Austin Knudsen. During his initial remarks yesterday, Knudsen walked back some of his earlier stances when first in office, saying some things could have been done differently during a bitter procedural fight that broke out between the Montana Supreme Court and the legislature. This is the Montana State News Network.
When you see the emergency lights on the side of the road, slow down and move over. It's dangerous for first responders to help motorists on the side of the road while cars are buzzing by at 80 miles per hour. In Montana, when you see emergency lights on the side of the road, you must slow down and move over, or face a fine or even jail time. It's the law. When you see someone pulled over, slow down and move over.
Sponsored by the Montana Department of Justice.
To protect his home and family from disaster, Steve used courage, wisdom, and his camera phone.
That should do it.
Way to go, Steve! By simply taking digital pictures of his family's important documents, Steve can always have them stored safely online, no matter when disaster strikes. Learn other simple ways to protect your home and family before a natural disaster at ready.gov. That's ready.gov. A message from FEMA and the Ad Council.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. We are talking with Cory Swanson, a candidate for Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court. And so we had some questions that, unfortunately, we got cut off there for a second. Did you want to add anything to what Skip had to say?
Yeah, thanks, and sorry about that. The phone just went dead, so I had to hang up and dial back in. So Skip's question was about my opponent, Jeremiah Lynch, talking about precedent. So a point that I've made pretty consistently is that judges are, our goal is to be fair and impartial when we evaluate and decide cases. It's not the job of a judge to come in and fight for or against a particular policy. If you want to do that, you need to run for the legislature. You should not run for the judiciary. So my opponent has consistently, since really day one of his campaign, stated that he is going to fight for or against certain policies. And I've told him to his face, and I've told him others that the words he's using are signals. I call them dog whistles to liberal activist groups and to plaintiffs groups, saying, "I'm your guy for your liberal goals you're trying to accomplish through the judiciary." And that's been reflected in the massive amount of support he's getting from the Democratic Party, the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, radical environmentalists, and the trial lawyers. And they're supporting them aggressively, and they're making up lies against me on a daily basis. And that's because I think it's been very clear. He's also been very much against the legislature, and I think he's showing, and I've told him this, you're showing a bias in all your statements, and his supporters want that bias on the Supreme Court. So when it comes to the question of precedent, you have to understand that we have a system of law that's inherited from English common law, where we believe precedent, prior rules and decisions of the court applied to similar facts are important because they give us guiding and controlling law to interpret things. But he's using it in a different way. He's using it in a coded way to say that he will rule for abortion in every case. And what I've made the point very clearly is, number one, I believe in the value of good precedent as well. I also believe it's important for courts to write cases clearly in order to establish good precedent. And that goes back to judicial conservatism versus judicial activism. That means you decide a case narrowly based on the issue that's at controversy in that case. You don't take that occasion to then expand and write pages more that are beyond the specific issue that's the dispute in that case. And too many times our current Supreme Court has gone beyond the limited narrow holding and written long opinions that are in fact shifting the law. So where I've been criticized is because I have refused to give statements and pledges in advance saying I will rule for or against this particular issue every time, because you can't possibly know what that future case may look like. A lot of these cases are decided on procedural issues before you ever get to the substance of it, and whatever the substance of it is dependent upon the facts of that particular case. I'm not going to guarantee conservative, I'm not going to guarantee liberal outcomes. I'm going to guarantee outcomes based on the facts of the law of that case. So that code word, if you hear that code word of precedent thrown around, in this year, what it's meant consistently is my opponent is pledging to rule in favor of abortion rights in every case. And I've said, I will rule according to the facts of the law of every case, period. I'm not going to make pledges in advance in order to get millions of dollars of support from liberal activist groups.
All right, let's get another call on the line. This is Nancy. Nancy, you're on with Cory Swanson. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, Cory. I'm concerned with our First Amendment rights. Recently, the FCC is allowing George Soros, a well-known anti-American and hates the United States globalist, the right to purchase over 200 radio stations. He wants to block out conservatism. He wants to block out conservative radios. How are you going to protect shows like Peter and Nick's here at KGVO? I want to know your stand on that. This is just, nobody can believe that the FCC has allowed this to happen. I'd like to hear your thoughts, sir.
Okay, thanks for the call. Cory.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. I will say I've been really encouraged by the growth of really good radio programs in Montana. This program, you probably reach most of western Montana. Aaron Flint reaches all over the place. The Northern Broadcasting with Tom Schultz's show. I was up at Shelby, talked on KSEN. They reached kind of the whole northern tier. So I do really appreciate the value of these radio shows to reach people and to have free speech celebrated and exercised. George Soros, it turns out, is funding my opponents. He's contributed. It's really independent dark money. Both he's funding attacks against me and attacks against Judge Dan Wilson, who's been identified as the other conservative candidate. And I found out last night that Michael Bloomberg is also running attacks against myself and Judge Wilson. If you remember Michael Bloomberg, he was the mayor of New York City, and he's one of the foremost advocates of gun control in America. And he's using his money to attack us. I think more so Judge Wilson than me. But so I guess those are the people that don't like us, and I think they don't like us because we have a different point of view than they do. Unfortunately, the FCC and those licensing issues are a federal decision and federal issue. They're unlikely to come to the Montana Supreme Court, so I probably have no power over them. But in general, we will have decisions and issues on free speech, and it's the court needs to uphold those constitutional rights and not bow to any pressure.
And with that, we are up against a break. Your timing was perfect on that one, Cory. We're going to come right back. We have an app question waiting for you. Phone line still open. If you have a question or a comment for Cory Swanson, running for the office of Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court, we're going to come right back after this.
Right now at Les Schwab.
All right. We are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. Of course, we'd prefer if you use the KGVO app to send in your question. And Cory Swanson joining us on the phone right now. And it is home in Townsend right now, hometown of Townsend. And so let's go ahead and talk about, we have an app question. Nick, please.
Yeah, Dan wanted to know, why in a non-political race do candidates identify themselves as conservative? He said this would indicate that they're likely Republican-leaning, as the two names have become over time quite interchangeable.
Yeah, and I think that is a great question. So the only thing I would correct on it is I don't think it's a non-political race, because there's no such thing as a non-political campaign, but it's a non-partisan race. So the Supreme Court positions, all judicial positions, are nonpartisan. So I'm a county attorney. My job is nonpartisan. Some counties elect by party, and mine does not. So I've been a nonpartisan county attorney for 10 years now. What happened in this race early on is I have established a judicial conservative philosophy, and that's what I've continually advertised myself as, and that's different than a politically conservative. Now, I have a background as a political conservative, and I'm not going to hide that. I'm proud of it, but in terms of my approach to the job, it's not about my conservative political philosophy, it's about my conservative judicial philosophy. That means the methodology in which we decide cases. We don't substitute our judgment for the policymakers. We don't retry the facts. We trust the judges, the district judges below us, to retry and decide those facts. And we issue decisions narrowly rather than expansively, which causes a lot of instability in the law. So those are some of the hallmarks of a judicially conservative methodology. That has nothing to do with whether someone is conservative or liberal. It's the way in which you do your job. That's what we need on the Supreme Court. But along the way, this race has become more and more political from the point of view of ideology. But you have to realize something. If you go back and trace it, it's not me that started it. It was actually my opponent and Judge Wilson's opponent. The National Democratic Party announced in May that they was going to spend millions of dollars on Supreme Court races and listed Montana as one of those states. And they are spending that money now. We are seeing it right now. Well, they're not spending it for me. They are spending it for my opponent, and they're not spending it for Judge Wilson. They're spending it for Judge Wilson's opponent. So the Democratic Party initially started this. When the Republican Party at some point this summer started doing mailers in support of me, I immediately notified the world on X. I said, I did not seek an endorsement from the Republican Party. I did not accept an endorsement from the Republican Party. But those are independent expenditures. They have every right to do that. They have every right to express their support for or against various candidates. But at the Great Falls debate, Skip mentioned the Great Falls debate that's being broadcast on television. You ought to watch that. Mike Dennison pointed out to all the candidates that it's basically there's become a liberal-conservative dichotomy in this campaign. And he listed all the liberal organizations that are supporting my opponent and that are supporting Judge Bidigary and they're opposing myself and Judge Wilson. And we're not running these. It just happened naturally over time that it kind of paired up as us, the conservatives, versus then the liberals. But I want to make this point clear. I'm not campaigning on a promise to deliver conservative results on policy issues or on outcomes for cases. I'm saying I will use a judicially conservative methodology. I will rule on the merits of each case. If that means the merits of the case, the conservative deserves to lose the case, they will, because I won't care if it's conservative or liberal. I'm going to focus on the attributes of that case. But it also means I'm not going to pledge outcomes to guarantee the results that my backers want, like my opponent's done, and I already talked about, because that's why he's got so many different liberal groups lining up and supporting him. They don't know. They don't have a guaranteed outcome from me. They have a guaranteed outcome from him, and that's why it's become partisan. Not because I started it, but because my opponent and his supporters started it. I think we need nonpartisan races so we can focus on a fair and impartial judiciary, because that's what everybody wants.
Well, I will say, Cory, that one of the things that has come out over the last 10 years or so is that the Montana Supreme Court, and you can tell me if this is accurate or not, is the most overturned state Supreme Court in the country. Now, is that still true?
I think that's probably true. It's a rare occasion for a case to go from the Montana Supreme Court to the United States Supreme Court. It can happen. It has to. Two things have to happen. Number one, whatever that decision is from the highest court in that particular state, it has to involve a federal question, a federal constitutional or statutory issue that then the U.S. Supreme Court has a chance to review. But secondly, the Supreme Court has to agree to take it, and they don't take a lot of cases. So it's rare for a case from Montana to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. But there's been several cases. And I think most of them, I can think of 4, and 3 of them were overturned. The other thing you have to remember is that the Montana Supreme Court often overturns its own precedent, and that leads to a problem. That leads to instability in the law. that I think is a problem. And part of the way of there's two ways to address it, I think. Number one, they need to more clearly write their decisions and more narrowly write their decisions to establish good precedent they can rely on later. And then secondly, they need to be guided by that law to whatever outcome that case produces and not decide, well, I don't like that outcome, so I'm going to overturn precedent to get to a different outcome. And that goes back to that judicial conservative versus judicial activist methodology of deciding cases.
And that's where the problem with the word conservative comes in, because conservative is used in many different ways politically.
Yeah, you could call it self-restraint. You could call it, strict adherence to the role of a judge, not the role of a legislator. But shorthand is judicial conservative.
Gotcha. All right. We're about less than a minute away from a break. By the way, the phone lines are open. And do we have any more app questions, Nick? We do? Mm-hmm. Let's do that. Go ahead, please.
You don't want to? Okay. Mark called earlier and phone line dropped, but he wanted to know, you mentioned you wanted to make positive changes in the Supreme Court, Cory. He said, I want to know what those positive changes would be, or what the negative things going on at the court that you were observing maybe were.
Yeah. So I'll be quick on this because we're going to run out of time. Number one, I do think the majority needs to be more restrained or judicially conservative in how they decide cases. And my goal will be to lead that effort. And then secondly, I think part of the problem with the tension with the court is people don't understand the court and how it works. I would like to be a lot more open to the public and have a lot more outreach educationally so people can understand how courts work and how they make their decisions. I think that would do a lot for the people to better understand the court and then kind of increase their level of trust with the court.
Okay, with that, we are up against a break. We're going to come right back. Cory Swanson stays with us until 10 o'clock. So if you have a question or a comment, use the KGVO app first, if you would, and send that to us. If you haven't got the app, just download it from the App Store and hit the Message Us button, and you can send that directly to Nick, and we'll pass that along to our guests. Elaine is waiting on the line. We're going to come right back with her phone call for Cory Swanson, who is running for the office of Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court, right after this.
Need to replace your Social Security card? In most states, you can request one online with a My Social Security account. A My Social Security account gives you secure access to your personal earnings history and benefit status. You can also get a proof of income letter, estimate and apply for benefits, and more. Save time. Go online. Open a My Social Security account at ssa.gov/myaccount. Social Security. Securing today and tomorrow.
Produced at U.S. taxpayer expense.
We are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, and Elena is waiting to visit with Cory Swanson, a candidate for Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court. Elena, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you. I have two main questions. Earlier, you mentioned that you worked for AG Tim Fox, the Department of Justice. At that time, how were you involved in convincing the legislators to support the CSKT Water Compact, and on what grounds? And then my second question, what do you know about the CSKT Water Compact mitigations currently in water court? Thank you, and I'll listen on air.
Thanks for the call.
I couldn't hear the second part of the question. I heard CSKT Compact in water court. I didn't hear what the word she said. I don't know if she said mitigation or negation.
Litigation.
Litigation in water court. Okay. Well, so yeah, I worked for Tim Fox when he was Department of Justice. I started out really skeptical and as an opponent to the Water Compact. I was asked to work on it with the folks that were involved, including with the governor's office. Over time, I came to realize that the compact was necessary. So you have to go back to the fundamentals of water law, and you have to recognize that the rule of first in time, first in right holds true for all water enforcement appropriation unless there's an agreement contrary. And the way that the compact was being set up, or if it failed and it went to litigation, there are two things that were going to greatly deprive water irrigators, particularly non-tribal irrigators on the reservation. Number one is that the tribe had First, they had indigenous treaty claims of water that went back to what's called time immemorial. You can't get a water right more senior than that. And secondly, they had treaty rights from 1855 for water, which was more senior than the most senior non-tribal irrigator was probably going to have early 1900s water rights. And so what that means is, the second thing you have to keep in mind is that in the Columbia River Basin, which is where the Flathead system is a part of, it feeds into the Columbia River Basin that goes to the Pacific, there were endangered species rights, federal claims dealing with fish species and insufficient flows for fish species. Those were on hold. The feds put them on hold pending the outcome of the compact. Those two claims, the endangered species fish claims in the Columbia Basin, which would be enforced in federal court, and tribal claims for more senior water rights were going to be enforced, to where if you were not part of an agreement, a non-tribal irrigator on the reservation was going to have a very difficult time getting the water they needed to do their crops and to run their operation the way it had been run for almost a century. That required us to then make an agreement that allowed enforcement in a graduated way that would satisfy on-reservation irrigators before all of the fish and tribal rights were fully satisfied. That required an agreement. It's that simple. The second thing is you had water right claims that would have been filed in probably half of Montana, the western half of Montana, that many of those were tribal rights claiming that they had been there for centuries and eons and that they had some historical rights. So some of those would have probably been upheld, some of those wouldn't have. But that process would have basically restarted the water rights adjudication for half of Montana. So all those farmers and ranchers out there who paid water rights lawyers and gone through the adjudication would have to do it again or be delayed another, I would say, 5 to 20 years. And I found that the state of Montana was not ready to have that fight, that the predecessors before Tim Fox and the governors at that time had not prepared Montana for that fight. So when we reached that point, I worked with a negotiating team to help on-reservation non-tribal irrigators get better guarantees in the compact, and those guarantees in the compact, which I think made it better, also led to the passage of it. And the passage of it, there's some people that still hate it, they're still against it, but I can tell you the alternative would have been much, much, much worse. I litigated the Tongue River litigation between the state of Wyoming and the state of Montana. We're talking one small little drainage, and it took years. And we spent about $8 million by the time it was all done to win that. And all we got was the right to enforce a call on Wyoming to fill the Tongue River Reservoir, a tiny, tiny, tiny little microcosm of the complexity of what we were going to face in the Flathead litigation. So I tell you, it would have cost, I don't know that you could put a price tag on it. $20 to $30 million would have been a conservative estimate, and years. In the end, the only people that would win would be the lawyers. So I felt that the compact was necessary.
I was going to ask you, how would it have been worse if it hadn't been revised as you just described?
Well, the first thing that would have happened is the tribe was going to file a constitutional challenge to the Montana Water Court adjudicating these rights to begin with, because there's a federal law that's called the McCarran Amendment that says that state adjudication mechanisms can decide federal rights tribal rights so long as it meets certain mechanisms. So the tribe was going to first challenge that in the federal court, saying Montana Water Court doesn't meet these requirements. Simultaneously, they were going to file all their claims in the water court, which would have halted moving towards final decree for all the basins in western Montana. So then that's round one, and that could go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to decide the McCarran Amendment issue even before we began the adjudication. And then we also expected a claim from the federal government for Endangered Species Act flows in the Columbia Basin, and that would go through federal court as well. So the problem is, before Montana ever got to actually adjudicating these water rights or finishing what it was doing, we were going to have two different tracks going through federal court that would take up years of litigation before we even got to the point of settling these claims. And then when you get to every drainage, every basin, we're talking thousands and thousands of water rights claims. Every single one of them would be fought over with historical experts of where the different Confederated Salish, Kootenai, and Ponderay tribes had operated over the course of centuries. So it was basically built up for the longest litigation slog in the history of Montana. And the problem I had was the tribe had prepared for this, and the state of Montana had not.
Right.
All those years when they were negotiating, the state had not prepared for it. I was shocked at how unready the state was to actually wage that fight.
All right. Well, it's good to know. And thank you for sharing the background there, because I know a lot of folks have had questions, and now it's settled. So, but it's good to know a little bit more of the historical background. We appreciate it. We're going to come right back. By the way, the phone lines are open if you have a question for Cory Swanson, who's running for Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court. Please give us a call, 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. Phone problems notwithstanding. But we also would appreciate it if you use the KGVO app and hit the message us button. We'll be glad to pass those messages along as well. Stay with us, back right after this quick timeout.
Senator John Test.
Hey, welcome back to Talk Back. 721-1290 is our number. Cory Swanson joining us on the phone right now, running for the office of Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court. And before we get Sean's call on, I know that there are some things that you wanted to discuss before our listeners to let them know exactly what you're working on, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So one of the things that happens in these races, we talked about the big money, the George Soros and the Michael Bloomberg and all the different liberal groups that are attacking me. And one of the things that you can't compete with is millions of dollars spreading lies about you. But there were a couple things that have prominently come up that I feel the voters need to know about. So the first is there's a claim going out here that I'm against stream access and I fought against stream access. And that's absolutely false. In 2009, I represented a group called Citizens for Balanced Use, which is a group that focuses on both protecting private property and also protecting access to public land and multiple use development and recreation on public land, logging, mining, etc. We supported the stream access bill. There was a bill in 2009 dealing with the fences and the way that you access streams off of bridges. What we wanted, though, is we wanted a better wording dealing with the fencing requirements, because we didn't want landowners to have to pay for big, expensive fences. We wanted fence requirements to be clear, and then we wanted a mechanism where nonprofit groups could pay for those. Well, the legislative committee member who was sponsoring the bill didn't like our amendments, and he forced us to be listed as opponents on the bill rather than proponents. But we advocated amendments that got on the bill, that made the bill better and stronger, that reduced conflict between landowners and sportsmen, and that bill got support 48-2 in the Senate, and I think 95-5 in the House, and then Governor Bullock signed it. So my amendment that I advocated made the bill better and strengthened stream access, and it was supported by almost the entire legislature and signed by the governor. So this claim that I'm against stream access is completely wrong. Then as a county attorney, I strengthened stream protections through a litigation. It was called Fortner versus Broadwater Conservation District. It went all the way to the Montana Supreme Court. We won it. And that case also strengthened stream protections based on the Mitchell Slough case. So I've been an advocate for protecting streams and stream access through my career, and those who are saying otherwise are simply making up lies out of thin air. The second big attack is there's an attack going around saying that I gave a deal to a wealthy landowner dealing with a subdivision decision in Broadwater County. Here's what really happened. I have a long-time friendship with this landowner. I was worried that it might appear to be a conflict of interest. So I disclosed to my county commission, and I said, I need to recuse myself from this subdivision because of the appearance of a conflict of interest. I followed, there's laws, there's ethics laws that are specifically clear of how you do that. And I followed that law to a T in disclosing that and recusing myself. And my deputy county attorney did the case. Well, then it became a moot point because I got deployed to the Middle East in January of 2022. And the commission made the decision, and all the stuff that they did with it while I was deployed. I was in the Middle East commanding an infantry battalion and had absolutely nothing to do with that subdivision. And yet they've again made up a lie saying that I gave them a sweetheart deal through that decision when I was literally on active duty in 2 continents away and had nothing to do with the subdivision. So those are the kind of lies that you can't compete with because they have millions of dollars behind them. But I want the voters to know the truth.
Got it. All right, let's go ahead and get Sean on quickly. Sean, what's your question?
Oh, good morning, Cory. Oh, yeah, I took water law and contract law from Judge Leslie at Bozeman, who was the first water judge. And a lot of people call in. They seem to have some anxiety about the tribe. I'm a member of the tribe. But what people need to know is that the 1855 treaty is not what the reservation is now. It was basically all of western Montana. And the tribe, I don't think, is against the state. But people get concerned, and I don't know if it's Republic Water or other things that come through Canada that could be front-based corporations for China or who knows what, So anyway, have a good day.
Thanks for the call.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Yeah, and I can't pretend that the water compact is perfect. There are things I wanted to improve on it. The thing that you have to keep in mind is you have to get fairness in enforcement and implementation. So that's an ongoing job for the state of Montana to ensure that they're getting fairness in enforcement and implementation. And there's problems up there that I'm aware of. I was up in Lake County and talked to some folks, but the state has to be at the table making that thing fairly implemented.
Cory, I wanted to, we're almost done, but I want to give you a minute and a half or so to give us your stump speech. Why should we vote for Cory Swanson?
I appreciate it very much. This is a change on the Supreme Court. We have 2 seats that are up out of 7. There will be a change. The change is whether it's, the question is whether it will be for the better or for the worse. I believe the Montana Supreme Court can do a better job of deciding cases in a more restrained manner than getting politics out of its decisions as much as possible. And that over the long term is going to do a lot to increase the stability and the clarity of Montana law and reduce the political tension, the unnecessary political fighting in Helena over the role of the court. And if I can do that, and I can do a better job of being a messenger as far as how the court works and making it more open to the public, I believe that Montanans will feel a lot better about how the Supreme Court operates and about how the entire legislative process works between the executive, the legislature, and the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is not part of the legislative process. It's only when cases get challenged and come to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's job is not to make policy. Its job is to simply interpret the law. That's the vision, and that's the message I've been communicating to everyone consistently. And I would urge you to support me in that, because that is very much what I believe is at the heart of what we're doing. I will tell you, Judge Dan Wilson, who's running for the other seat, shares that view entirely as well. And I would urge you to look at him as well as a good member of the court.
All right.
Thank you all for your time.
You had a quick website. How do we contact you?
Yeah, SwansonForJustice.com, and that's FOR. It's not the number 4. SwansonForJustice.com. You can also find us on Facebook.
Thank you so much, Cory. Best of luck to you, sir.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.
And thanks for answering all those questions, even with our phone problems. So, Nick, what's coming up on tomorrow's fabulous program, sir?
We'll just be on from 9 to 10, and we'll have City Talk.
All right. Ginny Miriam will have a special guest from the city. And, of course, again, we've discovered we can use the phones, even though they don't sound 100%. So we appreciate your patience and your willingness to jump right in despite what's going on, but things that we can't control. So we appreciate you hanging in there with us, and we hope that you will do that again tomorrow. Again, of course, we'll be following Hunter's Breakfast with the captain and his crew. And then following that, we'll have City Talk with Ginny Miriam and a special guest. So I want to say thank you to Rob Natelson for being with us here in the studio. Also, thank you to Cory Swanson, who is running for the office of Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court. Get out there and make